today we're talking to Priya, who is one of our awesome teachers in Reno. She's been with us from the very beginning.
From the beginning.
Yes. Um,
Yeah.
and she's got so many cool things to talk about, so I won't say too much because I listen to Priya talk. Um, but first of all, I just wanted to ask if you could maybe introduce yourself, give us a little bit about your background so we know where you're coming from.
Totally. So my name's Priya, and I currently live in Reno, where I do. I work for the power company, actually, in the field of energy engineering. I have been an energy engineer in various things: solar energy, oil and gas, power, flooding, all kinds of civil and mechanical engineering in public safety and delivering energy. That's my day job. And my night job is teaching yoga, so particularly the path of bhakti or bhakti, the path of the heart. I am from Dallas, Texas. I born and raised in Texas, of Indian descent. My parents were born and raised in India, so I sort of grew up with the bhakti. And I did my teacher training in the amazing city of New Orleans, Louisiana, with Sean Johnson and Mitchell Blyer. And then I did a Kundalini teacher training in Austin, also with Mehtab Benton and Siri Bahadur Khalsa. So mostly I teach the Vinyasa Bhakti style, but I also teach Kundalini yoga, and I also lead kirtan and chanting here in Reno. And it's just been a wonderful experience with Good Elephant. Yeah.
Yay!
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And so can you give us a little more in depth on what bhakti is, how it's different from normal yoga that we see every day, and the where does it come from? What does it feel like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is such a great question. It's a question that I think those of us who are even drawn to the word bhakti are still exploring in many ways. But the summary is that bhakti or bhakti is really translated literally to devotion and pure devotion. So when we say that word, that's literally what we mean, and it's devotion to God or devotion to the divine. And what I really like about this is that in India, you will see that this devotion is tied to the deities that we hear about, Krishna and Kali and Hanuman. However, the path of bhakti is wide open. So whether you have a being that you connect to, or whether you come from a religious background, a spiritual background, an agnostic background, or even an atheist background, bhakti, I feel, or I know, has a place in that for everyone, because often it's just our higher self that we're trying to connect to, and the wisdom of our higher self. So I believe that bhakti helps us connect through our hearts to the wisdom of our higher self. And bhakti is also about surrender. It's also about that pure surrender, that trust, that. Are you still there? Do I still? Yeah. I lost the sound.
Oh, yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay.
I muted myself so I wouldn't
Oh, sure.
interrupt you.
No. So bhakti is also about surrender, in that the surrender to a divine plan, or surrender to the journey that our soul wants us to go on, and the trust that everything that happens for a purpose of growth. We love the things that happen for the purpose of joy and happiness, but the path of bhakti, or the path of surrender, is trusting that when things don't go right, or things don't go in the way that we planned, that is also all deeply guided by something, our soul or a divine plan. And that we surrender to other entities or other beings, or be it Christ or Krishna, anything like that. These beings are there to help us, and whether we think of them as literal or metaphorical or an aspect of ourselves, I think is one of the beautiful things about bhakti, is that we choose how and when and if we can relate to that. And so traditionally bhakti does involve a lot of chanting and singing. And as a scientist, it still baffles me and amazes me to wonderment how this works, because so much of bhakti is about using our voice and the connection that our voice has to the divine and this power of sound and sound healing. And so this energy that happens, when we chant, is part of the process of surrendering and trusting and opening the heart, which is the third thing that I like to say about bhakti, is bhakti is really about opening the heart and connecting to the heart. Yeah. If you
So
had to,
cool.
yeah.
What were you gonna say?
And so many people ask, in relation to your first question, so how does that relate to yoga, like the postures and the asana? And I would say that traditionally in India, it didn't. There was not a connection between warrior one and a chant, although there are many poses like dancer pose and Hanumanasana and things that have gotten names. But what's really great and beautiful about this is we have such a license to create and to tap into our creativity as divine beings. So I tap my creative source, my creative well is creating sequences, yoga sequences to music and to mantra that we flow in. And I wouldn't say those things have necessarily been paired together from the beginning of time, but there's no reason they can't be. And when you integrate the asana, the mantra, the music, the rhythm, the setting, the energy of the group, when you integrate all those things together, they make a really, really fat piece of apple pie that you really can digest and savor all at the same time.
Awesome. Oh my gosh. Cool. Okay. I have way too many questions for a half an hour. But um I just want to talk a little bit about we're talking with teachers who are anywhere from yoga, meditation, tai chi, um all these different any introduction to mindfulness. How would you suggest, is there any strategies or techniques to kind of bring a little more bhakti into whatever it is you're teaching?
Yeah, so I think one of the most simple things you can do to bring this devotion and to bring this bhakti energy into really any practice is to, one, set an intention around the heart, and then two, to breathe a little before you do anything. So it's easier in like a vinyasa class where you can use the mantra and use the music and all of that to help with the bhakti feeling. But bhakti is really this feeling that we have in our hearts. And so um, it is believed, I think, amongst many healers that really the heart is the wellspring of healing. So any technique that you're doing, whether it's Tai Chi or meditation, any type of flow, any exercise like that, just a little bit of breath work to open the heart, or intention, or both, can really, I think, bring that feeling into the space and into the room. Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
is that, I guess it's both, right? Like breath work that you're doing yourself to bring your own heart into what you're teaching, and doing it with your class
Hmm.
too. Okay.
That is a really great point, Ali. Yeah. Um, our own energy that we send out and the presence that we have is really also everything. It's like a transmittal that we give and the channel that we are to our teachers. And so when we, as you know, stay in our practice, do our own practice regardless of whatever that is, but we get really grounded, and we have that feeling ourselves.
Mhm.
And we don't always have good days, you know. There's some days we may not necessarily want to get out of bed, because everyone has different situations. And so even on those days, to just put your hands to your heart and find gratitude for something. I also believe gratitude and appreciation for the things that we do have is a great way to feel that. And the other thing that those who have been around Bhakti and practicing it, or been around the energy of it for a while, is to really surrender and ask one of these energies, whether it's Shiva or Krishna or Kali, like, hey, can you help? Can you help me? I'm having a bad day. or invoke that, because it's said that when we ask, these energies are all just waiting to help and step in. And many people that have done this practice have also called on their own soul, their higher self, to find that feeling and to connect. And so when we connect, when we're in alignment, mind, body, and spirit, that can really produce that feeling for ourselves and our students.
Yeah. And I think that I know that's part of the reason why your classes are always so successful, is because when I walk into your class, I feel that from you. Like, I feel it's like you're this big heart, like, cartoon, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, oh, Priya's here. And you can tell that you do that practice yourself, because it really shows when you greet people in class and stuff. And I also love that way of calling them energies is such a great way to separate it from the kind of, if someone has kind of like a religious connotation with
Yeah.
all of these deities and things, but it's talking
And
about,
they certainly,
yeah, like, I'm calling in Shiva, not necessarily Shiva himself, but his energy. And I'm going to embody that today because that's what I need. And in a way, he is helping me in that way. But
totally.
yeah, and that kind of leads into, you know, what I would really love to ask about, is because your classes are always so welcoming, and they feel very inclusive for new people, and yet they go so deep into that heart space, which I've found, other classes I've been to, other teachers I've talked to have a hard time balancing that, and even hearing feedback from students like, oh, that was way too serious, or I wish we would have gone a little more into the spiritual side of things. Like, how do you, what's your perspective on keeping that balance?
That's such a good question. I think I always keep an open mind to everything and everyone's background and perspective. Some of that is my upbringing, but when we ourselves are open to whether it's really serious things, serious spiritual things, or religious things, or even non-esoteric things, that whole gamut of everything from Shiva energy to no connection to that cosmic wave. When we ourselves in our hearts have the space for that, and I guess the sympathy or the empathy or the understanding that all of these things exist for a reason and everyone's on a different path, I think that's a big part of it, is our own cultivation of where we are in holding that space for everyone. And I don't have a lot of understanding of religion per se, in terms of organized religion. Even Hinduism, I don't have a lot of deep understanding of, although that's where some of these things are taken from. But probably the number one thing I'd say is really curiosity about each and every one of your students and where they're coming from, and just giving them the space and holding that space to do anything from just lying on the floor if there's an injury that day, to not chanting. And I think one thing I say over and over again is, this is really your practice. This is really for you to modify or up level or down level. I'm just your guide in a way. I think it's sort of interesting being a teacher is kind of a big label, I feel, sometimes, being a teacher, and it's like, what does that mean? And so when I start teaching a class, often what happens is there's like a channel that turns on, and I just speak whatever comes through me. There are some times when I have to actively find the channel when it's a crazy day or something's going on out there in the world or whatever. But usually I would say 80-90% of the time, that 95% of the time, that channel just turns on, and then somehow I automatically speak to what needs to be said, or I use or I ask for divine guidance. I ask for that guidance for that class, and what the needs of that class are. So I think the other thing is, when I prepare for a class, I use my music, the mantras actually, as a guide, and I pick the theme around that music, and that helps the sequence and helps to help choose postures that are really accessible. So I tend not to go into really, really deep postures that are only accessible to extremely advanced students. So there may be certain inversions or certain arm balances that I may not do a lot, but I may do crow pose. Say we go malasana is one option, just a squat, or crow pose, actually lifting the feet, and then the other version of that is maybe jumping back or side pose. So kind of thinking about like one key peak posture that could be accessible to everyone, whether you're actually physically just starting out or not, and then using the music as a guide. I think that's and I also I try to include other cultures and religions as well. So there's Christ mantras, wherever I can find Sufi mantras, wherever I can include other besides the Indian subcontinent, besides those energies as well.
Ooh, cool. Okay. And then, so you were saying that Bhakti wasn't originally connected with asanas.
Correct.
It's more of a philosophy than a yoga.
Yeah.
That one part of yoga, right?
It's such a good question, Ali. This is, I think about this almost every day. I'm like, what is this? It's almost, you know what it is? It's almost like an imprint. It's like I was, somewhere along the line, I was imprinted with it. And once you have the imprint, you just have it. So it becomes a way of life, and it becomes a culture. It isn't something you turn on and off. You actually are, you just are that.
Cool.
And I think that's part of the reason why it's relatively easy to, so it's kind of like not being initiated or inaugurated, and what's what the right word is there. But it's like once you step into the river, you're in the river. You're just flowing in the river. Actually, Krishna Das calls it flow of grace. So Hanuman is one of the main energies, and literally he has an entire book devoted to this topic of how when you step in the river, if you choose to step into devotion, you're always in it, you're protected. It's bhakti, they say, is one of the safest paths in the world of yoga and spirituality, because it's totally rooted in the heart. And when we get too much into our mind, the very, very mind-based energies can sometimes take us into places of too much worry, or too much thinking. And the heart always has the truth. The body always has the truth. The heart always has the truth. And so in terms of safe, we mean you can trust that wisdom that's coming from you, and it becomes more and more clear what's coming from your heart and what's coming from your mind, because the universe is always talking to us, and we just have to pay attention to those messages and the signs. But yeah, it's interesting. Over the years, you discover that those who walk into a bhakti class or walk into this path always have it with them in some way.
That's so cool to think of it as an imprint.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like
it's like contagious. Is that a word, contagious too? It's like this energy that you just share and spread, and it multiplies and just becomes yeah.
And that makes sense to me then. Like if it's a way of life, like I feel like all yoga philosophy is too. But if you're bhaktiing at the grocery store and bhaktiing with your husband, and then you can do yoga with the imprint of bhakti too. You can do the asanas with that too.
Right.
So it's just carrying it over.
Exactly. What a perfect way to explain it. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so I'm always I always feel so like indulgent when I don't want to hear the stories, and I want to know more about each personality of all these energies.
Mm-hmm.
So you talked a little bit about Hanuman.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a favorite one, and can you give us like a brief, like little more in depth of that one?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm definitely
Maybe
most connected personally.
I don't know.
No, there's so many. It's interesting because they show up at different times as different energies. So my Ishtadev, it's said that we all have an Ishtadev, or a main energy that we are connected to, and mine is definitely Hanuman, that flow of grace. However, I may embody more Lakshmi. So what's interesting about these deities is that there's an equal balance of divine feminine and divine masculine. And so the feminine has as much or more power than the masculine. And these are equalized and mixed, and it's a beautiful metaphor of how we should be as humanity, instead of holding one or the other gender, or it's more about equality in power. And so I think one of the most interesting and fascinating energies that there is Kali, or Durga. I'm fascinated with her because she is depicted in actually pretty graphic images. There's like blood coming out of her eyes, and she's stepping on Shiva's body. You'll see that again and again. And when we dive into what that means, it's so metaphorical. It's very, and we are forced, when we see those images, we're like, wow, that's an intense image of Kali. What is she doing? And then you start asking questions, and then you start reading the story, and you start reading the mythology, and what she represents is really fierce love, really deep, fierce love. And she represents the spectrum, the end of the spectrum of intense emotion that we feel as human beings, whereas like Hanuman may be on the other end. He's more neutral, and and more just purely, Hanuman is more of a pure energy, and Kali is more of a ferocity. And I love that contradiction, that contrast, that you're like, okay, we're allowed to be, as humans, all of these things are really crazy and fierce and really pure and devotional, and we still deserve love. We don't have to earn that love. Kali didn't have to go and be you know, a sidhu or a monk or a nun to experience you know, her own divinity in full. And so, and then there's every sort of energy in between that spectrum, male and female.
Oh,
Yeah.
so beautiful. Yeah. And listening to you talk about it, I can picture you stepping into the flow of devotion, but also, you know, it's kind of like it pulls you in and you start to learn more and more. And then you're like, whoa, I'm getting swept away by all of this cool, all the metaphors and oh my gosh, it's so cool.
Yeah, that there's many layers and many versions. Kali turns into Lakshmi, Kali turns into Parvati, Kali turns into Durga, all these different faces that she has, that we have. And the deep exploration of the freedom to be that, because she represents a goddess. I mean, a feminine energy that's so fierce, that's a goddess.
Oh,
So yeah.
so cool. Oh my gosh. Well, cool. Well, yeah, I feel like, you know, in terms of like my own teaching and and bringing more heart into it and more of the spiritual, I feel like my biggest takeaway or whatever is that curiosity. Like, it's okay if you're talking about Hanuman and you don't know all about Hanuman, right?
Yeah.
That's a situation that new teachers find themselves in. They're like, I want to bring in all of this, but I don't feel quite confident about talking about it. But the idea is that it's just being curious. It's just
Yeah.
and letting it flow through you without judgment or without expectation of what it will be, but just yeah.
Yeah, just the pure intention that you say the name, and this is emphasized again and again in this path, is just simply saying the name Hanuman, Krishna, Shiva, Christ, Allah, Buddha. That these, saying their name is so powerful. And if all you have the capacity or the time to do that day is connect to their name, you started a transmission.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so cool. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Priya. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing. Oh, do you have any suggestions for books to read, or how can someone get more, learn more about this stuff?
So my favorite book to really open the path of bhakti is the book Be Love Now. Be Love Now by Ram Dass. And it was written not too long ago. I want to say like 2010 or so. It was written, but the book in itself is a huge energy vat of energy that is so blessed. Just the words, just having the book. It explains actually a lot of the roots of the path, and a lot of the people that have shared it, especially in the West, and the traditions from the East. It's a great opening to bhakti. So, and a lot of the Ram Dass, Krishna Das books are that. If anyone wants to dive into goddess energy, it's a little bit more of an academic book, but one by one it goes through all the goddesses, and it's called Awakening Shakti. It's by Sally Kempton. And so it's a fabulous book. And the other thing I would encourage everyone to do is, if you see, like, there's some really great festivals like Bhakti Fest and Shakti Fest, that a lot of them are in California, but And there's several in the Midwest and in Colorado as well. But those festivals are the energy there, the feeling there, because, going back to Bhakti being a feeling. Yeah, it's magic. It's pure, pure, pure magic. So I think listening to a lot of this, like Sean Johnson has a lot of great stories that he tells that I think you can get on iTunes now, that go into all the deities and their stories. And it's a movement that's growing and growing and growing in the West, and it's been really sweet to see it. And that's the word for it is, it's one of the sweetest practices there is.